weeks. In 20 years, no, that's not going to be our primary source of revenue for transportation, because by then I'm sure we'll have we may not use gas at all, or certainly at least many cars will be high mileage and running off alternative fuels. But for right now, that's not yet the case, and certainly not for the next few years. Secondly, I think it's valuable for the state to allow local jurisdictions the flexibility to raise revenues themselves in ways that they and their voters see appropriate. I think the state will want to rely very judiciously on bonds and public-private partnerships for key projects where those are very appropriate, but that's not going to be the overall revenue source that helps us deal with maintenance backlog across the state. It just doesn't provide the sums of money that would be needed. I think the state has very wisely decided to evaluate mileage fees, and I hope that will continue and be taken seriously, perhaps even beyond the specific effort right now that's being undertaken to do a pilot project. And then finally, I hope that the state continues to evaluate other promising options for raising revenues, whether that's higher truck weight fees or moving some of the truck weight fee revenue into dedicated pot of money for transportation. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention. And before I run off, are there any questions?
Well, thank you for that presentation. I want to point out that I heard a presentation in San Jose, and I appreciate the presentation to Professor did a great job, and we'll hold questions until we finish the other.
So sorry, sir. I actually have to run to catch a train.
Oh,
so
you do? Okay, then we'll ask if anybody has any questions. I had a question because I saw your presentation before, so I know what you did. I thought, has there been any other states that have approached this in any particular way that's been creative, in your opinion? Anything else that's going on in other states? That was a question.
I mean, some states, it's not very creative, but some states are raising their gas taxes. We've seen a number of states do that. I would say that though there's a lot of interest in switching to taxes on the price of either retail fuel or wholesale prices of fuel, and a few states have done that. They are now regretting it as gas tax prices have fallen.
Yeah, we're regretting it too.
Yes, I know. So I think that there is something to be said for the per gallon fuel tax, although obviously over time, inflation eats away the value of it. And I think Oregon has been very progressive and creative in looking into the mileage fee concept quite aggressively, and some other states are doing interesting work there. But Washington. I think California is comparatively doing well and exploring different options, and we just need to keep moving forward with that.
Okay, thank you. I just want to state that the Mineta Institute was created by the federal government, and there's 5 institutes around the United States that were created by the federal government, and the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, and Norm Mineta wrote the bill for that and decided that we want to have these research institutes to do basic R&D for transportation. So that's what they do. They do R&D for transportation as well as educate transportation graduate students. And they should serve as our advisors in a lot of ways, similar to we have University of California, Berkeley do our healthcare advice. We have the Mineta Institute that could do a lot of research on research for the state of California on different questions that you might have. So I just wanted to point that out, who they are. They have a fine program in many different areas of transit, this finance area, other kinds of areas that they do. So anyway, thank you very much for coming to our meeting.
Thank you very much.
And we'll now, I guess we'll next go down the list to Mr. Will Kempton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, very happy to be here this afternoon, and certainly happy, Mr. Chairman, to hear about the Mineta Transportation Institute. I'm privileged to serve on the board of directors of the Mineta Transportation Institute, and appreciate your comments. Certainly.
Oh, excuse me, Will, Ann, did you have a plane to catch?
Mr. Kempton can continue. Thank you very much.
So you can do that. I'll wait for you, you guys next, and then we'll have her go first,
That's
okay?
fine.
Is that okay? Okay. Go ahead, please.
In any event, happy to hear the comments about the Mineta Institute. Interestingly enough, I also teach a class on transportation funding and financing through the Institute, and I was telling the Assembly Transportation Committee yesterday how it is getting more difficult each year as we make our funding system more complex. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that maybe had come up a bit earlier, because I think there's some good news in all of this. Secretary Kelly talked about the California Transportation Infrastructure Priorities effort. We heard about the governor's inaugural address and his recognition of the $59 billion in state highway needs. And then we've also seen a spate of legislative proposals this year that would deal with the transportation funding question. And frankly, I do think that's good news, because regardless of how you would gauge each of those suggestions or ideas, it does mean that this issue is on the radar screen. And at the Transportation Commission, we've been pushing on this button for a number of years, beginning with our 2011 needs assessment that did look at a very comprehensive picture of what we need to do and invest in California's transportation system. And so we're happy that we're talking about this subject today. And I think there's also a growing consensus among public and elected officials that fix it first is really what we need to emphasize. Taking care of the existing system makes good sense. We all, most of us own homes, and we have to invest in our homes to make sure that they can stand up to the wear and tear of the elements and over time. And Senator Cannella brought up the issue of the way we do business, and I think that that's obviously a significant component of whatever we talk about with respect to transportation funding, and that is figuring out ways to reform and modernize the way we do business. So you asked us to look at some revenue solutions which could help fund our system needs, and I think since longer-term solutions are going to take perhaps a number of years to develop, we need to look at near-term action to help address some of the more immediate needs. The Transportation Commission does an annual report, which included in its 2014 version a look at 4 specific options, including truck weight fees, excise taxes, early loan repayments, and cap and trade funding. But we also have been charged with some long-term sustainable solutions, and I think we also need to address the appropriate expansion of congestion pricing and tolling operations. We need to look at the greater use of public-private partnerships and then the implementation of a road charge program here in California through Senate Bill 1077. Just a brief comment on some of the more near-term solutions. We mentioned in the report to the legislature the potential of directing weight fees back to the state highway account. That's been the subject of a number of comments today. I think Secretary Kelly summarized the issue fairly well. Weight fees currently going to debt service, but a recapture of those weight fees does have general fund impacts, and it's going to require a balanced analysis to take a look at that. Yeah. The Speaker's proposal, for example, returns the weight fees to the state highway account, but backfills those fees with new revenues. And the excise tax, if you look at that, we've heard today how it hasn't been increased for a number of years, and it's looking as if we're going to lose additional purchasing power as we move forward. So options could include raising the excise tax, not necessarily the most popular choice in the state. And an example of that is for every penny increase in the excise tax, you'd raise an additional $146 to $147 million a year. Or you could index the taxes to inflation. If we had indexed the current 18-cent base excise tax to the consumer price index back in the last time that the excise tax was increased, we would be looking at 28 cents a gallon compared to 18 cents a gallon, and that would be raising a significant amount of additional money. Currently, the 18 cents per gallon raises $2.6 billion. If it was at 28 cents per gallon today, it would be raising $4.1 billion. And if we went to the highway construction cost index, we would be at 38 cents a gallon, and that would raise about $5.5 billion. So there are ways to take advantage of the existing excise tax as well. I think your background paper does an excellent job of looking at a variety of options, and I don't want to belabor the point other than to say that the sales price-based excise tax, the price-based excise tax that was created by virtue of the gas tax swap in 2010-11, is a very volatile, requires a very volatile annual adjustment of the revenues. And it was intended to be revenue neutral, so when the sales tax on gasoline was done away with, a new excise tax was imposed to match what that would have produced at about 18 cents, 17.3 cents precisely. And over the years, that has gone up and down. And I can tell you that that volatility is problematic from a variety of perspectives, not just the fact that when it goes down because the price of gasoline has dropped, we lose a substantial amount of money, as is going to occur on July 1st of 2015 when a new rate goes into effect. But we also don't have the ability to plan effectively for transportation programs. And the State Transportation Improvement Program requires a fund estimate every 2 years, and it's very difficult to assess how much money is going to be available to let planners and engineers know what they have to plan for. And so the Board of Equalization considered that issue this morning, and the recommendation from the staff was to reduce the current 18-cent price-based excise tax to 10.5 cents, which would have been a $1.1 billion loss of excise tax revenues for our program on an annual basis. Wow. They reduced that to 12 cents, which now reduces that hit to about $875 million. Still a sizable hit. I would really encourage Mr. Chair and Madam Chair that the legislature needs to consider some action to neutralize the volatility of the current mechanism. And I think somebody already referenced.
That's SB 321.
Somebody already referenced your bill, Mr. Chair.
321 to deal with this volatility issue.
Early loan repayments, the governor included in this year's budget $351 million, which has already been referenced, payback to transportation accounts. Kudos to the governor for that action. The California State Association of Counties estimates that there's an additional $1+ billion in outstanding loans. If we can recapture those loans over some reasonable time frame, no new fees, no new taxes, just pay those dollars back. Cap and trade provides support for the achievement of AB 32 goals, and there's been SB 862 of last year creates a framework for use of those revenues generated by cap and trade. So beginning in 2015-16, we will see 40% of the auction proceeds going to transit and rail investment, 25% for high-speed rail, and 15% for bus and rail operations. We've got some current legislation, as I mentioned at the outset of my comments, that really, from a standpoint of attention to the issue, give us a degree of hope for a solution to this problem. Longer-term solutions, I think they've already been mentioned. I'll just touch on them briefly. Congestion pricing and tolling. Secretary Kelly talked about those issues as a means of providing additional funding. It increases reliability along major corridors. It provides dollars for the maintenance and operations of toll facilities, in addition to being a supplemental revenue source. I mentioned public-private partnerships. We need to extend that authority. It currently expires on January 1st of 2017. It's just another option, another tool in the box, as they say, for funding transportation projects, but we also probably should look at streamlining the process as we examine that mechanism. And finally, the most significant feature of the longer-term solutions that we're looking at here in California is the road charge under Senate Bill 1077. This is a mileage-based user fee. It can be a potential replacement to the gas tax. It's based on the number of miles driven, and it requires the study of a road charge pilot, which is included in SB 1077. The California Transportation Commission is playing a key role in the development of that pilot program. We had the charge of creating a technical advisory committee, which has been done. That committee has already met once and has its second meeting on Thursday. Right. And we're beginning a robust public outreach effort to get the word out about this possible change in funding and to seek public input, which is going to be absolutely essential so that we meet the needs of the public and answer the appropriate questions that are being asked, issues related to privacy, data security, a whole range of different concerns that people have. If we're going to do a road usage charge or a road charge in California, we definitely want to do it right. The state of Oregon is a little bit ahead of us in the game, as was indicated by the professor. We're going to be catching up very, very quickly. I look forward to working with the legislature on the development of a pilot program, which would be implemented presumably at the end of 2018. The charts that I provided you includes a timeline there for the road charge program. The last slide shows where we are today and where we would end up in June of 2018 with the completion of the pilot program. And as I indicated, we look forward to working with the legislature as that process goes forward.
And I attended my first meeting. I'm on that committee. So.
Senator Bell is the Senate representative on the Technical Advisory Committee. That completes my testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Why don't we go to Ann, because you have to leave pretty soon, right, Ann? So why don't we go to Ann Meyer? She's the executive director down at Riverside, and you also have background of not only working in the Riverside Transportation Commission, but working in our state government, Caltrans, correct?
I do.
So welcome. I really appreciate you being here, coming up here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. Again, I'm Ann Meyer, the Executive Director of the Riverside County Transportation Commission, and I am here today to share the perspective of the regional agencies who are responsible for administering the sales tax measure programs throughout the state. Self-help agencies have been doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting to advance California's infrastructure physically and politically over many decades. Our existence was the result of chronic underinvestment in the state transportation system and a desire by local leaders to ensure that local decisions could be under local control. It has worked because voters know that the money stays local and that those who pay the tax see a direct and tangible benefit in their communities. I hope to convey to you today a couple of things. First off, that self-help counties have taken bold risks, and our local elected officials have taken bold risks to raise transportation revenue for California for decades. Second is that we've retained the confidence of voters, and that makes us essential to any funding solution. However, third point, self-help counties cannot be expected to forever fill investment gaps left by state and federal government while also having to comply with additional policy requirements. This has been mentioned before. The Self-Help County Coalition consists of 20 counties throughout the state of California. We contain 81% of the population, roughly 30 million people. Each of us are governed by local elected officials who are accountable to voters. They collaborate across geographic and political lines to address quality of life and mobility challenges unique to each of the regions. These governing bodies have taken the risk to ask their constituents to tax themselves for specific transportation projects and programs, and the standard for success is very high. We need over 2/3 of the voters to say yes to an expenditure plan in order for it to go into effect. And in many of our counties, the voters have said yes, not once, but twice, and in some counties, they're headed for 3 times. Self-help sales tax measures generate over $4 billion for transportation programs and projects throughout the state of California, and the sales tax programs cover maintenance operations, capacity improvements, active transportation, transit, habitat restoration. There's a wide variety of improvements and programs that occur with that $4 billion. It's also important to note that that money is also invested very significantly in the state highway system. That $4 billion leverages additional state and federal funding as well. I'm going to give you some examples in Riverside County. $57 million of Measure A sales tax money is leveraging $138 million in federal funds and $53 million in state funds to build a 24-mile extension of a commuter rail line. $772 million in Measure A money is leveraging a $421 million federal TIFIA loan to build a $1.4 billion express lane project on the State Route 91. that State Route 91 Express Lanes project and our I-15 Express Lanes project to follow shortly on is a perfect example of the kind of project that uses life cycle analysis when looking at the project. That project will be responsible for funding operations and maintenance within that corridor, within that toll corridor for 50 years. So tolling projects provide the perfect opportunity to incorporate life cycle analysis into the project. Also like to point out that it's the use of tolling as a way, as another user fee to be able to fund the financing of the project. Also in Riverside County, 30% of our annual revenues are allocated to local agencies for local street and road maintenance and capacity improvements. So that's an important contribution to the local system as well. In self-help counties across the state, nearly every construction project you see is happening because of the seed money that was put in by self-help dollars. Despite the success of these local programs and despite $4 billion being pumped into the system on an annual basis, it's not enough. It's also important to note there are 38 other counties in California who do not have self-help capabilities. They don't have a local sales tax measure, and they are completely dependent on state and federal resources in order to move their programs and projects forward. Their needs are critical and must also be addressed. While transportation funds were diverted to balance the general fund during the recession, self-help counties partnered with Caltrans, USDOT, to deliver the Prop 1B $19.9 billion in Prop 1B funds as well as the ARA funds. Those funds are gone. We're left with the same deteriorating fuel tax, no solution to operations and maintenance backlog, and no certainty of how we will be able to continue to meet the expectations. So when we look back at the tangible, real success of those programs, what can we point to? Promises were made and promises were kept. So what do we do going forward? First off, start with the low-hanging fruit of returning truck weight fees to transportation accounts. This has been proposed by both sides of the political aisle, keeps faith with the voters, and brings nearly $1 billion back to transportation. Now, it's been talked about today that leaves a deficit in the general fund. I must point out that for years, transportation dollars have propped up the general fund in times of needs in the general fund, and that history should be considered as we look at that balance. Second recommendation is to stabilize the extreme fluctuations in the annual BOE adjustment, and very pleased to see SB 321 on the table today, so that was very good news, and certainly pleased to hear that BOE is proposing a lesser impact in the annual adjustment this year, but that's still an area that needs to be stabilized. The third thing, I think we need to work with Speaker Atkins, Chairman Bell, and other legislative leaders to increase transportation funding. We're grateful that this year there's a lot of conversation about the need, there's a lot of conversation about the options, and there's a certain sense of urgency here. The fourth is to keep all the options on the table, and I think you've heard that repeatedly today. There are a lot of options being discussed. They are not all easy. Some might be better than others, but we need to be able to keep all the options on the table and talk about which combination of options might be able to give us the greatest benefit for solving our problem. Now, I really need to emphasize this, and I think you'll see not only in the self-help experience, but also in the polling that the professor talked about. The self-help experience is a critical lesson. Any future revenue that the legislature pursues, the first priority should be that the user revenue must benefit the user that's being taxed for those services. Local and statewide elections repeatedly show that public confidence is maintained only if transportation money is used for transportation purposes, and that's really important in order to start getting acceptability for some of these really difficult options under consideration. And then finally, we need to make better use of the money that we already have. It takes an average of 17 years to get a major infrastructure project out the door, and the public expects and deserves much better than that. We need to continue to focus on efficiency and innovation and making sure that we minimize bureaucracy and not add to it. So with that, I'll complete my comments. I applaud the discussions that you're kicking off here today. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and happy to answer any questions.
Okay.